There was an interesting tweet a couple weeks ago by Fiction where he tweeted out, "What do you guys struggle most in Melee right now?" And there was actually a lot of responses, and funny enough, not actually that many solutions. So I, a top player, want to answer some of these. Really, the difference between a top player and everyone else is that top players bang their head in the wall so many times that at some point we kind of found an answer. My goal here is that you guys don't have to go through what we had to, and kind of find a little shortcut to a lot of the little questions that was asked throughout the tweets. And here's the tweet right now. It actually got a lot of responses, and the first one I saw, which is quite honestly pretty relatable, is Blur's uh, endeavor. I find Melee to be painful, fruitless endeavored when I'm out of form. And basically what he's saying is that even when he takes 1 to 2 days off, he just can't play Melee. He needs a proper warm-up, even to do like the very basics of Melee. And claims that he doesn't see any improvement for a few days until, he gets into form. And then there's all this logic that he's saying that how could I put in so much time into Melee when the payoff takes so long to see? And since he doesn't really want to put in that much time into Melee, he also finds it impossible to enjoy Melee casually. It's a game that most people love, but unfortunately not something everybody can just casually enjoy. It's kind of like in a weird existential crisis sort of moment. Here's my thoughts to what Blur is saying. Basically, what I think Blur really doesn't like about Melee is that it is primarily an execution game. It is a game that tests how well you can move. And I think what Blur really likes about Melee is the expression and the feeling that you could get off of Melee once you are at your top form, as well as some strategical elements and whatnot. But Melee is primarily an execution-based game. I know Blur, and like kind of personally, I've coached him quite a bit in Melee, and Blur, he's quite the thinker. The unfortunate thing about Melee is that it punishes you for thinking too much. If you want great execution in Melee, first you gotta learn the basics of, certain execution stuff, but you also can't think at the same time, at least like not overthink. I personally relate to this problem a lot. I found that like my peak plays are when I'm barely thinking, and my worst plays is when there's like a lot of noise going on in my head. And if you ask anyone else, any other top players, how they get their peak execution, Mango, Zane, IBDW, Plup, are they really thinking when they're playing? The answer is no. You will hear from them that they don't quite think when they're playing Melee, when they're playing at their best. Versus, when they have things like, oh my god, rankings, or like, pressure or expectations, now they're starting to choke. Now they're starting to miss stuff. That's why top players tend to choke whenever it comes down to the wire, or they underperform. It's typically because they're thinking in some way that's quite unproductive. This is my guess that the reason why Blur finds it so hard to get back to form is because Blur is probably thinking about his old form, how like, when he's at his peak, oh my god, I was so good at this and now I'm trash. And what happens when you think that is that like the graph is like, here's like peak skill, and then when you don't practice for a little while, your skill is like more like here. When you catastrophize how you're feeling and thinking how you're playing, it goes down to here. And that's probably what Blur is experiencing when he's practicing, trying to get his tech skill back, making it feel like he is playing really, really bad. Not everyone feels the same as Blur. Like, you have Reach, who's like a pretty solid Falcon main from the Midwest, I believe. He's claiming that he has built up muscle memory. He took 7 months off, and 1 day of practice, his tech skill was back. So clearly something is going on with people's inner mechanism of gaining good tech skill in Melee. And Rish is demonstrating, like, it is possible. That's how you see some legends like Santiago come back after not practicing for years and, like, beat some of the best players in the world. And still it's top 50. Because, like, they don't overthink. As Santi, and he will definitely say that he doesn't really think too hard about his execution. That's not to say, by the way, that like, just do whatever, press buttons, unga bunga. You gotta actually know like what you're doing wrong with your execution. I'm not saying that when you're making errors in your execution, you just don't think about it at all. You should definitely note what you're doing wrong, change it, but still don't overthink it. That's kind of like the key distinction of doing good execution. My theory is that when you push past that, even with this bad mindset that Blur kind of has, you will get over it when you practice daily. Like Blur is saying that, when he's playing for a few days, enough warm up, he can finally play. It's just always a pain when you kind of get back to form. That's answering like the casual part where I think if Blur wants to play casually, which I feel like a lot of people do as well, just don't think too hard about your execution, and you might be surprised of how good your execution is to enjoy the game at a casual level, which, by the way, casual being relative. I think what Blur means is basically not top level. But as for like the fruitless endeavor part, I don't know. I feel like it's also just adjusting your expectations. I think in order to address his problems about Melee being a fruitless endeavor when you're out of form, I think he could find his way to be in form a little bit better by not overthinking and catastrophize his play, because you will mess up when you don't play that much. You could just make the process easier when you get back to form. Many players have done that, and it is possible for you to do that too if you've put in sufficient practice and knowledge of the game. Alright, what's another one? I primarily interact the game through Unranked, seeking instant gratification, so I spend all my time playing without thinking, and none of my time thinking without playing. Actually, I don't know if that's actually really a problem of Unranked itself, because, first of all, Polish lives in the East Coast, which means he's gonna find good players. Like, I've seen people cycle through East Coast Unranked with IBDW, JMook, Kobol, Slug, Polish, all. It's like, those are some stacked ass games. Lod, Ginger, like there's so many good players in the East Coast. Regardless, not the point. Say theoretically, you are playing friendlies with just only bad people. My solution to this is that, friendlies are what you make it to be. I mean, like, if you, say, lose in friendlies, and you kind of just bang your head in the wall hoping that you will just improve, that's obviously not a great way of utilizing those unranked games. You should probably analyze more and see what you got to change in your gameplay. Conversely, if you're winning a lot, you should probably, I don't know, challenge yourself a little. Say you're destroying this guy really badly with one tactic, change up your tactics and give yourself a little challenge that, okay, maybe I should try being this way, experiment this. So like, if you're the better player, trying out new concepts, new things, new technology. I think that also has a lot of value in Unranked, Go look up Nunn's videos. His Unranked stuff is disgusting, and I bet you that does help him a lot as a player. And of course, there's also that, even if you're fighting a bot, like a really, really bad player, you could just practice reaction tech chasing no matter what. Like, it doesn't matter how good they are, it's just, well, you just practice reaction tech chasing, and that's always valuable. Again, Melee is primarily about execution, and you're practicing the execution of your punish game. It's very important. All right, here's Joshman's. Fox versus Spacies give me nothing but headaches. Now, obviously, I'm no Fox main. I can't really comment about the state of Fox versus Falco or Fox, nor can I really offer much technical advice about this. It's like, oh, here's this one trick. It's like, no, I know my place. But what I can say is that I would argue that you don't understand matchup until you're like literally the best in the world. Any level below that, your worldview is quite flawed, in my opinion. Like, I've had so much misconceptions about Mark versus Fox and Falco until I played Mango, until I played IBDW. What they do that absolutely no other Spacies ever does in the world is like, it's like mind-boggling and like earth-shattering, and then you play like every other player that's like below their skill level, and it's like, man, I wish they would do that and that, and that makes it so then like your current view is honestly irrelevant, and it only matters once you're like literally one of the best. I could sympathize, like, obviously, like, some matchups you'd rather not want to fight in bracket and friendlies and whatnot, but I do want to communicate to literally everyone that like you don't understand a matchup, and therefore you still have a lot of work to do. Like, a classic example is like the Martha, where like it's a degenerate matchup in the beginning, and then once you learn more about it, it's like, oh, Maybe it's fun. Maybe there's more interaction. And that's kind of what I'm saying is that, like, once you understand at the very top, it might not be a headache. If you feel like a matchup is like degenerate or giving you a headache or like boring, I don't think you really can say that correctly up until you're at the top level. Keep pushing until you get better, is basically what I'm saying. You don't truly understand once you're at the very top. Now, here's another one I think that most people relate to is struggling with motivation to compete in general. You put a lot on the line when you compete. Your pride, your ego, the expectations of results, all of that in hopes that maybe you're better than the last time you competed, trying to go for the W sometimes. And I'm just going to say it, most of the time when you compete, you're not going to get what you want. The struggle with competition is that you are putting through everything and you're like putting something on the line. And for most people, you will not get what you want. I think this is probably the main thing that people struggle with competition is that when they don't get quite what they want, it really tempers their motivation to compete, Think of it like a feedback loop. Like, why compete when it's just a constant negative feedback loop? Like, you want to go past 2-2, you want to go past 0-2, you somehow go worse than 0-2. I don't know. You also go 0-2 in amateur bracket, and that also that feels even worse, That's the struggle of competition, is that I think this is a reflection of a negative feedback loop. There's obviously myriads of reasons, but I think this is probably like the most common reason. And to address that, I think you would need to answer why you are competing, for one. And secondly, if you answer why you're competing, does that answer whether or not you're okay with both results? I think the key of maintaining consistent motivation is being okay with both winning and losing. Because, when you lose, for example, say you want to compete to better yourself, and when you lose, maybe a typical worldview would be like, well, I'm no better as I was last time. I should just quit. Maybe instead of viewing it that way, you should view it like, you know what? I lost. That gives me a lot of material to work with. Now that I lost in bracket, I have a lot of things to work on. Maybe that excites you. And then if you win, it's like, yeah, I passed that test, Obviously, there's ups and downs as a competitor, but I'd say like a consistent source of motivation for me is like seeing how much I have to push myself and like the new problems I have to solve every time I go up the ranks and go down the ranks. It's always a challenge for me personally to, keep on going, keep on pushing. That's why I would suggest to most people competing, if you're struggling to find motivation, most likely you can't accept both outcomes, and you need to really dig deep why and try to find a way to make losing acceptable. Oh, here's another classic one. Winning sets. Get fucked, Geo. Nah, I'm kidding. Honestly, it's kind of like what I said last time to the earlier post, which is like, the more you accept that losing is okay, ironically enough, you're probably going to win more. Because like, it draws from the first question. Melee is a game of execution. Your execution is better when you don't think a lot. And when you simply are okay with winning or losing, your headspace is a lot clearer. You're not thinking as much, and your execution is better. Therefore, you have a higher likelihood of winning. I think this is good advice for anybody looking to up their consistency with high pressure situations, especially Geo. Of course, there's this Moky tweet where he says, I care too much about public perception to the point where I never want to compete or interact with a lot of this scene anymore. And, feels like he doesn't get rewarded for his good placements. And then the moment he does bad, people are like, fuck you, Moky. And yeah, I definitely relate to this a lot. I gotta practice what I preach myself, where it's like, honestly, I need to be able to accept both outcomes when you're losing and the consequences that come along with it. The thing about confidence is that confidence, I've read this somewhere in the depths of the internet that I thought was a pretty good definition of confidence, which is confidence is not about being sure that you're right, but staying true to your values, and values where you could accept every outcome. That's true confidence, is being able to accept any outcome and just being proud that you stuck to your values. I think the reason why Moky is feeling this way is because, he made a big Twitter video spat on how he feels like he's, one of the best in the world, and then gets heated when people underrank Moky. And, the moment Moky underperforms, he has those shitters that are like, You thought you were this good. And yeah, that gets into Moky's head. And once you kind of say things that might be a little controversial somewhat, I think probably the best thing you could do is still stick to your guns. Even though it might attract some haters, you still need to stay true to your values and still be confident and stick by it, even though there's consequences. Sometimes Mango can do controversial stuff, but like, he's Mango. He doesn't give a fuck. And people respect you for that. The funny thing is that when you stay true to your values, even haters respect you. And when you kind of like cower away from your values, I generally notice that like that's when the haters get to you the most, is when you're not sure about yourself. But when you are very confident in your values that even haters get heated about, and you just stick to your guns, you just can't help but feel respect. That's sort of the thing about competition and, having a voice like that, is that, you're obviously going to lose sometimes, you're going to get some haters, but you just got to accept both outcomes and be proud of it regardless. And then here's Med's comment where he is salty and refusing to look at his losses for improvement because it hurts too much. Also getting in your own head when I play awful. Can't help but feel that those two are very interrelated. Yeah, basically he's saying that his ego is getting in his way of actually improving. And that's a pretty common problem. I feel like that has to do with expectations somewhat. Like what I answered with Ambi's question, where it's about accepting both outcomes. And when there's a certain outcome that you can't accept, that's just going to create more voices in your head. I think in order to able to handle the pain of looking at your losses, you really have to tap into values that can accept both outcomes. That, this is basically Ambi's question, this first half. The later half is Blur's question. And I do feel like having good values that can accept both outcomes is key to being able to, rip off the band-aid like Zane does. If you ever heard any interviews or how he got better, was that no matter how much it hurt, he always ripped off the band-aid. Even though it hurts a lot, he's gonna push past it and see what he can learn. The value of improving means a lot to him. It also means a lot to me. I do the same thing pretty much all the time. And it's definitely really hard when you get in your own head and feeling like you're playing like shit, when you're playing awful. The best thing you could do is just recognize that you're feeling this way and then trying your best to move on. And honestly, for the latter part about when you're getting in your own head, when you're playing awful, doing mental exercises prior, like meditation, to sort of silence the noises going on in your head. Because, when you're just going on your day on and about without like any sort of mental headspace calmness, you're very likely to get annoyed at your own head every time you mess up. I could personally say that this has happened to me a lot. Like, the last few months, every time I play off, I'm like, oh my god, I can't do this. But I noticed lately that my execution has been getting better every time I do a meditation session with my meditation guides, and utilizing this app called Headspace that Jmook also does. That's why he has a very clean posture and has a very calm demeanor. Even though if he's not playing well, he's able to silence his head and play well. That's kind of like my two big critiques, is knowing your values when looking at your losses, and maybe look into meditation to reduce the noises going on in your head. Now, here's a classic. Listen carefully. Don't do a hive dare on shield. I think this is an example of going in with a match with like a preconceived idea. People do this because it's worked in some way before. Like, they played their bad friend. That shield grabs really late. So therefore, a high dare on shield, that will work. But then once they play better people, it's like, oh shit, that doesn't work. That's why, like, the higher level you climb in Melee, the more you realize that you don't actually understand a matchup, because things you thought was previously true is all of a sudden invalid when you go at higher levels. You thought that high dare and shield might work, it won't at higher levels. And that's why you kind of like need to dissect step by step when you start losing, doing high dares on a shield. It's like, why did that not work? How can I do something different next time? How can I play that position better? Kind of recognizing that you need to do something different is a big step in the right direction once you realize that. The main takeaway here is that your preconceived ideas may not necessarily be true the higher levels that you go, and you need to re-examine that every single time. And here's this funny meme of KJH where there's actually too many things to improve on in Melee. And that's correct. There is so much things to get better at in Melee. It could kind of be overwhelming once, like, especially the better you get, the more you realize, like, holy shit, there's so much to improve at. My solution to this is that you gotta actually look at what are the biggest problems going on right now, because not everything in Melee will give you similar returns equally. You could get better at Moonwalk and Multi-Shining, but is that really going to help you get better nearly as much as your execution and your punish game? No, those always need to be looked at first if you want the fastest improvement. Obviously, there's other factors as well. You know, you gotta improve at, you know, as many things as possible. But when you can't really pin it down, like just how much you need to improve at, always stick to the basic principle that execution and punish games are like a really good starting point. And, you know, your defense as well. Look at those first. And once you feel like those three things, your execution, your punishes, and your defense are well refined and you're still losing, then that's when you could start looking at other things. But chances are, when you improve at those three things, you're gonna win. Stay true for me. Honestly, there is still so much questions. Like, I think there's like hundreds of these. Maybe I could make a part 2 of this. I mean, let me know in the comments if this is something that, you know, you think I should make a part 2 at. There's definitely a lot of good material at. Those are like some things I think people can get better at Melee. Hopefully you found this video somewhat insightful and informative, because Melee is really hard to get good at. I don't mean to make this like necessarily as my shill, but anytime that you don't know the answer to how to improve or something, I think that is probably one of the best times to get a coaching session, you know, either from me or even Fiction. He's what I heard, a pretty good coach. You could hit him up, you could hit me up. It's like when you don't know an answer to something, you could ask. That's what I did a lot in order to improve at all. Feel free to hit me up, comment if you want me to make another version, and please subscribe and like the video.